Dumont presents Jacqueline Suzanne's Open Door. Will not be seen tonight, so we can instead bring you Countdown, the first news hour on cable to seriously cover Occupy Wall Street and the Occupy movement, the longest continuously running 8 p.m. news hour on cable, unless you consider Fox News. We're live each night at 8 Eastern. We call it Our Little Leadership Team. If 60 United States senators get their way, the Senate will pass tomorrow a bill allowing the American military to imprison American citizens indefinitely without charge or trial. In our third story in the Countdown, the provision is so onerous that the president says he's willing to veto the bill that contains it, the National Defense Authorization Act. The amendment was written as a measure against terrorism by Senator Carl Levin, a Michigan Democrat who chairs the Senate Armed Services Committee. It is opposed by both the ACLU and Republican and Tea Party Senator Rand Paul, and by Democratic senators such as Al Franken of Minnesota and Dianne Feinstein of California.
Congress is essentially authorizing the indefinite imprisonment of American citizens without charge or trial.
I think that denigrates the very foundation of this country. It denigrates the Bill of Rights. It denigrates what our founders intended.
An amendment to eliminate the provision was proposed by Democratic Senator Mark Udall of Colorado. The alteration was defeated 60-38 on Tuesday, despite backing from the White House, which said applying this military custody requirement to individuals inside the United States would raise serious and unsettled legal questions and would be inconsistent with the fundamental American principle that our military does not patrol our streets. But Senator Levin remained adamant, even though most of his fellow Democrats voted against him. He quoted the Supreme Court.
One line: there is no bar to this nation's holding one of its own citizens as an enemy combatant. Okay?
Okay, what happens if you're the guy they decide is the enemy combatant, Senator? Should the bill pass the Senate, it would go to a conference committee with the House and then on to the President. Joining us now is Raha Walla, the Advocacy Council for Human Rights First. We appreciate your time. Thank you tonight, sir.
Thank you.
How bad is this?
It's quite frankly absurd, Keith. I mean, here we are 10 years after 9/11, in the wake of the demise of Osama bin Laden, the only leader that al-Qaeda has ever known. And we're passing a provision that would codify the indefinite detention without trial of suspected enemies of the state. And that includes, as you mentioned, American citizens apprehended here on U.S. soil. We have not codified indefinite detention without trial since the McCarthy era. That's how extreme this is. And the most amazing thing is that it's not necessary. There are some very bad people out there that want to harm us, but the way we deal with these folks is we haul them into court, we convict them, and we put them away for a very long time. And we've done a very good job of this since 9/11. In fact, since 9/11, we've convicted over 400 individuals of terrorism-related offenses. So the system that we have works. The big question is, why are we going in this new direction?
The way it's phrased, is this bad writing? Is this a loose definition of terms, or is it specifically an idea that says we should be able to declare our own citizens somehow incarcerated or picked up on our own soil in this country, not in some part of the nation that is that the nation has influence in somewhere else in the world? It does specifically state that.
Well, it's just broad drafting, Keith. That's the problem here, and that's why it includes the citizenship problem. But it's much broader than that. Here's what the legislation says. It says that if you are suspected of being a member of al-Qaeda, the Taliban, or a quote-unquote associated force, whatever that means, then you can be held indefinitely without trial, whether you're an American citizen or not, whether you're captured within the United States or not. And it goes further than that. What it says is that if you're suspected of supporting the al-Qaeda or the Taliban, you can also be held. And if you didn't think the legislation could get worse, it actually does. And what it says is that if you're actually accused of being an al-Qaeda member and plotting an attack against the United States, you must be held in military custody. It's not an option anymore. The FBI and local law enforcement need to transfer these subjects to the military. So this is a piece of legislation that's so broad, so ill-defined, so prone to abuse, the Senate should take up as its first order of business tomorrow morning, striking it in its entirety.
If the policy of this presidential administration has been to work almost exclusively through the court system for non-citizens who are suspected of terrorism or indeed apprehended in the act of terrorism, why would 15 Democrats be supporting this measure? Surely they know that the president can't politically totally overturn what he's been doing for the first 2+ years of his administration.
Well, it's a good question, Keith, and I'm not going to presume to know what the senators were thinking, but here's what I will say. You know, we're in an election cycle. Senators, members of Congress want to appear tough on national security. I think there's an ideology out there that says we're at war with every terrorist organization aligned with al-Qaeda and every individual that's suspected of terrorism all around the world. So I think there's an element of ideology over common sense here. But here's the funny thing. This is a provision that's not opposed only by civil liberties and human rights organizations. It's opposed almost uniformly by the national security establishment. We have the Director of National Intelligence, the Secretary of Defense, the FBI Director, the Director of the CIA, all opposing this provisions. Now, I don't know about you, but if I have to put my chips with someone, I'm putting my chips with the professionals rather than the politicians in Washington.
Yeah. Last point, quickly. Are you trusting the president's veto threat?
I am. I think the president's very serious about the veto threat, and frankly, if the Senate wants to deal with these provisions, it needs to remove them from the bill or avoid having the defense authorization bill vetoed. And one point that needs to be made is that we have, we have plenty of opportunities to fund our troops. The troop funding goes through the Defense Appropriations measure, which is a separate bill. So the president can veto this measure and still fund the troops, and I believe he will if these provisions are not removed.
The Advocacy Council for Human Rights First, Raha Walla. Great, thanks for your time.
Thank you.
The bats out of Rupert Murdoch's hell have generally been remorseful, or at least creative, as they have lied about the immorality of their organization. But now, one Murdoch editor has not only not denied he broke the law on Rupert's behalf, he's saying he did the right thing, and the real crime is his bosses are denying it. Worst person's coming up.